Now, I understand that this video is not going to make a lot of sense to most people. I'm glossing over the explanations and the cross-linked references that support many of the arguments I'm going to make in this video. And the point is, this video is specifically for people who are pretty much already at that stage of realization. It's not designed to convert anyone, it's not designed to convince anyone. It's only designed to find people who are already at this stage. Now, for those who are going to miss these explanations, I'm going to give you pretty much a cop-out, which is I'm the self-proclaimed placebo messiah of agnostic mysticism. I have seen what the prophets are shown. I have heard, I've listened to what the prophets are told, even though told is not the right verb. And of course, after that, it took me 30 years to make sense of it and validate the factual foundation of many of the ideas. So, if this video makes no sense to you, that's okay. This video is not for you. I'm not uninterested in talking to you. I'm just not talking to you in this video. Let's start by defining the problem we have. It's very difficult to solve a problem that you don't understand. And one of the things that makes the problems that we currently have so difficult to solve is that we refuse to think about them in depth. Our reflections are all extremely superficial, trying to put band-aids on things that obviously are flawed at a deeper level than the one we're thinking at. So let's start with a definition of what life itself is. There's two characteristics that define living matter. The first one is, at the scales where matter is alive, it will behave in opposition to the laws of thermodynamics. And living matter is matter that accumulates energy and expends some of that energy in order to decrease its entropy. And that makes it anti-thermodynamic. The second really salient characteristic is that the anti-thermodynamic behavior, the behaviors of living matter in general, are not inherent to the matter itself, but are the result of symbolically encoded information. At the simpler life form stage, we're talking about DNA, which basically encodes both the form and the behavior of the very simple organisms. And as you get to higher levels of complexity, you start seeing what Richard Dawkins calls mimetic characteristics. instead of having all of the symbolic information that describes how a creature will behave and how it will and what it will look like, there is at the mimetic stage a way of exchanging information in non-chemical ways. The second thing we need to look at is the constructing process of living matter complexity. What we have seen up to this point is you have single-celled organisms. And when there's certain conditions that we don't fully understand because we've never been able to reproduce them experimentally, that most likely involve a certain amount of density of the cells, proximity of the cells to one another, and other triggers that we haven't discovered yet. The cells are going to start organizing. And at a certain stage, the cells are going to organize in a way that makes certain cells capable of certain things and not others, while, the things that these cells can do are done by another group. And that's when we start seeing multicellular organisms. Now we see in between organisms like slime molds or mushrooms that basically live as single-celled organisms until there's environmental pressures that leads them to behave in a multicellular fashion, to form structures with different properties at different places. Like from mycelium, which is basically a network of individual cells all doing their own thing, to the mushroom fruit, which is made out of a stem, a cap, lamella, and spores. When we go to a higher level, when we have the same phenomenon happen to multicellular organisms, what we see is something like beehives or ant colonies. A beehive is an organism. A bee is not. Bees do not have the ability to reproduce. That ability is unique to the hive itself. It is specific to the hive itself. Only the hive itself can be described as an entire organism. And that's, when we hit the stage of meta-organism, an organism made out of many bodies. Even though these bodies do not have all the characteristics necessary to describe them as a full organism. And this is what is currently happening to humans. Except it's happening in a dysfunctional manner. See, when a species enters an environment, and that environment is not robust enough to reach an equilibrium, the organism is going to strip down and destroy that environment and then migrate to another. And the model we are using to transition unconsciously to the stage of meta-organism are afflicted with that dysfunction. It's dysfunctional because we have reached a stage where there is no other environment to migrate to, and no environment is able to outcompete us in a way that creates a stable relationship. So we are the victims of an unconscious process of biological transformation that is not adapted to our circumstances. And that, of course, is because we are doing it unconsciously, and by doing it unconsciously, we are doing it through our biological, our genetic programming, which is adapted to an environment that has not existed in over 100,000 years. So this transition cannot lead to anything but our destruction in the way it is being done now. The place where it gets weird is that most cultures have stories about how this can't work and what's basically happening to us. And we imagine the meaning of these stories to be something completely different. So, the description I'm going to give is very literal, yet very unexpected. Most societies, most cultures, have stories about demons. They have stories about non-physical entities that are summoned through acts of ritual and faith, and that wreak havoc on the world and on the people who summon them, to serve them. The thing we create or summon or call upon to help us is actually the thing that is destroying us. And the analogy with demons is actually extremely literal. When we look at the organizing entities that we are currently stuck with, things like governments, corporations, NGOs, and so forth, these are non-physical beings with their own will. The fact that it's their own will and not the will of the people within it is made obvious by the fact that they pretty much systematically deliver the opposite of what people want. And they only have influence on the world, and they can only affect the world through two processes. Influence and possession. Possession sounds like some sort of completely, we see Linda Blair in The Exorcist. But actually, the human that does the job of a police officer, the human that does the job of a judge, does not have the powers of a police officer or the powers of a judge. These are only things that they are able to do when they are manifesting the institution that they are manifesting. These entities get more powerful through human sacrifices. if you look at the influence of governments on the world stage, it is almost a perfect overlap to the amount of people that these institutions have killed. And it goes on, and I want to keep this short. But what is happening, our problem, is that we are creating, through the simple act of believing them to be real, because they exist nowhere else but in our minds, we are creating entities that torment us. And pretty much all human history is a chronicle of humans being tormented by institutions that behave the way we describe demons behaving in our stories. So, when we understand this, we should deduce that there's a bunch of things that cannot work. Politics cannot work. These defective institutions cannot be turned into effective ones. We have to create things that have never existed before to replace them. And activism is not going to lead to anything, because activism is just begging institutions that obviously don't want to help us for help. It's obviously not going to come from business, because money as a overlapped symbol over reality falsifies reality and makes everything you do serve the abomination that torments us. And it can't be a revolution either, because, that window closed in the late 70s, when the factories started moving overseas. If the resources that your population's life depends on are not made locally, then any revolution will necessarily lead to becoming the new cops for the same power. Because political power is who controls what. And to try to separate the economic power and the political power, the power of business and the power of government, is ridiculous. They are one thing. So what can work? What can we do? What can solve the conundrum we're stuck in? Well, it obviously cannot be anything that has existed before. Now, we have no record of sound institutions that don't torment the humans that are stuck under its will. So that gives the people who refuse to continue participating in the collective suicide that is participation in current institutions, your choices are between cancer and symbiote. And of course, cancer is self-defeating. The cancer cells do not survive the death of the host. And we can't escape the host because the host is now global. And there's nowhere to run. So, how do we become a symbiote? How do we obtain the resources that cannot be obtained in the traditional way? Because the entire world is now a meta-organism that has appropriated all the resources. Well, there's the waste. We need to become the organism that lives off the waste of the host organism. It's something the host organism needs because it is unable to deal with its own waste. It's killing them. It's killing it. So, pretty much, we throw away everything we make as fast as possible. The wealth of the world is mostly present in the waste that we kill ourselves with. Undoubtedly, almost certainly, 99% of the technologies required to do this already exist. They're just not economically viable in a money-based system. So by renouncing the concept of money and transactionality itself, we create opportunities for making things function through the two real fundamental incentives that things should be getting done through, and that are made impossible by money. The first one is enthusiasm. There's people who want stuff. They want people to have stuff. They want to share the experience of what they're making with others. And that's enthusiasm. People want to make stuff. People like eating. People like growing food because they like eating. And the other one is duty. And you typically, as you get older, you start understanding the subtle mechanisms, the subtle actions that are required to make the world be the way you want it to be and the way your community wants it to be. And people who understand this will be motivated by a sense of duty to do that stuff. Of course, there's a sort of ethical structuring required. We want simple rules to create self-emergent complex structures that work. And the way we do that is through ethics or morals, whatever you want to call it. Functioning morals are a recipe for the world you want to live in. That is how we define it in Agnostic Mysticism. So what are the small sample, of course, of the ethical principles of Agnostic Mysticism that makes it very different from anything else that currently exists? We do not believe in judgment. We believe that all humans are living creatures, and living creatures only ever do one thing: try their best to adapt to their environment. So if you see someone doing something harmful, it's not because they are bad. It is because they have inadequate adaptation strategies, or they are in an environment that is unsuited to their needs. Second, big, unique principle in agnostic mysticism for morals is the concept of natural property rights. There's nothing natural about the natural property rights. You can't find them in nature. I use the term natural for two reasons. First of all, to make fun of natural law people, and to describe an understanding of property that a 7-year-old can intuitively accept as self-evident. The idea of property, of course, is that as complex beings, we need stuff to survive. We are not self-contained in our bodies. If you live in a place where there's winter, you would die without clothes, you would die without a house. So, a home. So the person cannot be seen as just the bag of skin. So what are the natural property rights? There's 3 of them. It's very simple. First one, you own yourself. You own your body, your mind, your time, and your attention. And that is inviolable unless you are creating a self-defense requirement, unless you are violating the natural property rights of somebody else. The second one is you own what you make for your own needs. Now, of course, if you're making stuff for others, it's going to go to the other people you're making it for. But if you make something for yourself, then that is yours. That is a part of you. Unless, of course, you have obtained the materials to make it by violating the natural property rights of somebody else. And finally, the third natural property right is you own what you use for your own needs. Of course, again, as long as you are not using it in a way that creates a self-defense requirement, as long as you are not violating the natural property rights of others through the use of what you are using. And our last concept that I'm going to talk about today, in the very, very short list I'm giving, is pistocracy. A word I had to make up. It's based on the Greek word pistis, which is a concept that straddles trust and faith. It's a form of trust that cannot only be intellectual, and it cannot only be felt. It has to be a unity of both. And the idea behind this is that the only real thing, the only thing that exists, that can give an institution legitimacy is the trust of the individual on who the authority is being applied. Any authority that exceeds the trust it is given is acting criminally. Now, using authority and resolving a self-defense requirement are 2 very, very different things, and I'll make other videos to describe this. But the core idea is that no authority can be legitimate unless the person the authority is being applied on trusts the source of the authority. So this, of course, avoids what I call the two unholy ideas that turn normal groups of humans into demon-possessed masses of criminals. And these two ideas that I call the two unholy ideas are: you can justify violence outside of the strictest definition of self-defense. You can use violence on someone who is not in the process of harming someone else, which is standard operating procedures for all current institutions, both business and government do it with complete abandon. And the second unholy idea is you can declare law upon the unwilling. Yeah? That's basically the psychosis that gave us colonialism. It's the psychosis that gave us the clearing of the commons during the Middle Ages, and all of these absolutely despicable phenomena where an institution claims the authority to declare law upon people who do not trust the institution. When I say that we need to create something that has never existed before, I'm not kidding. So, if you're in the people who made it this far and not in the part of the people who have made it this far, who are hoping my family will get me the medical treatment I need, you might be wondering how you can help. Well, I've described a bunch of engineering problems to create a waste-based civilization. There's a whole bunch of engineering problems. If you are interested in starting to work on that, let me know. Of course, the one thing that I need most at this stage to advance this project and make it into a reality is space. I need space where I can live and work with, selected others on this project without having to think about generating the fucking idiotic money to continue using it. Because basically, you end up only generating revenue and not doing anything else. So I'm looking for a donated space that has industrial capabilities. And preferably somewhere in, at least in Canada, preferably in the province of Quebec. So if you have that, really do drop me a line. Of course, this has been a very short video that scraped over a very large and complex subject in very, very scant detail. Other videos are upcoming. And if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have suggestions, If you know of anyone who's already doing this, please let me know.